Recently, I have managed to find this gentleman's channel, which is a great channel, by the way. He talks about medieval weapons, armor. He talks about history, the lifestyle of people in the medieval ages, and it's interesting to watch. And I've been watched a lot of episodes from him, and I reached to this one, asking why are shuriken and throwing stars banned. And there's another video where he asks why are nunchucks banned. And he points out that nunchucks are very easily created at home. And you're also talking about the United States, right? Like a nation where you can have firearms, like you can own a Magnum, but you can't have a throwing star. And I actually looked it up, and I want to explain to him why these things are banned. Now, again, I'm not having the argument if they should or shouldn't be banned. I'm just trying to inform people what is the cause for the ban to have happened. So we're talking about a period between the 80s and the 90s when there were a lot of movies that were quite popular involving kung fu, martial arts, and ninjas. And they were usually Asian movies, either Chinese or Japanese films coming on the market. And they were very popular with the teenagers back then. And sometimes even people younger than teenagers. You also had cartoons like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and other similar cartoons that emphasized on martial arts and using different hand-to-hand and Asian weaponry, if you will. And I'm not part of the people who believe that violence on television gets kids to be violent. But what I do notice is that being a child myself, and I know this, children try to reproduce the things they see on television. And this is something that seems to have happened back then, where children would try to reproduce nunchucks and they would try to reproduce throwing stars, and they would end up injuring themselves. Nunchuck especially is a very easy weapon that you can injure yourself with. And I know this because a lot of kids, when I grew up, they also created this makeshift, at home nunchucks that they tried to spin around, and sometimes they would get injured. And the reason they were made illegal is obviously you can still have a nunchuck at home, right? Like you won't have the police coming in to inspect to see if you have a nunchuck. But if you see kids in the park playing with throwing stars or nunchucks, then you have a legal ground to detain them and inform their parents that they were playing with dangerous objects. So that this was like why the law was made. But if you want to see a fun fact, all of this was done on steroids in the United Kingdom. I personally see now that the United Kingdom is on the path of bliss is just one regulation away, right? They like to ban shit. Just Google Jeremy Corbyn ban, and you will see dozens of Google pages with things that he would want banned. I'm starting to think that if the man ever goes one day without thinking about banning something, he will go home angry and say he had a bad day. I really don't get this mentality, right? Like, banning things should be an exception. Like, under the most dire circumstances should the government think about banning something. But there are these ideologies that are very authoritarian and they want to do it as a rule. Like ban everything. But anyway, right, so in the United Kingdom in the 80s and the 90s, you had the morally outraged conservatives, who were constantly moral outraged about some shit. I personally like to call them the piety justice warriors, right? Like, the ideology was completely different, but they also wanted the same thing. Like, they wanted to ban things they didn't like. It's the type of people that they think if they don't like something, you shouldn't either. The people who think that if they manage to get something banned or censored, or get someone fired, it's a major contribution that they had for advancing society. I really don't like these people, regardless of their politics. I don't like the thing where you're just constantly trying to be morally outraged just to virtue signal. It doesn't matter if you're on the left or right. It's just an annoying tactic. But anyway, right, so these people were very active in the 80s, right? And what happens is that in the UK, there was an organization called the BBFC, who would rate all videos that were being released commercially. And this included cinema movies, home videos, DVDs, Blu-rays, and sometimes internet videos. But the thing with internet videos is that it's very difficult to enforce, especially in the 80s when there weren't bots and AIs that would track down everything that's going on the internet. So obviously people were able to bypass it. And because of that, the legal requirement and the legal hard limit, it was that if a film was rated to 15 or 18, you weren't allowed to sell a copy to anyone under that age or sell cinema tickets to them. The punishment being fines and prosecutions. So it's pretty much like in the United States, like if you want to buy alcohol, they would ask for ID. Well, in the United Kingdom, if you wanted to buy, I guess, a slasher film, like Scream or something, they would also have to ask you for ID. So in the mid-80s, home videos were a new thing. The BBFC didn't have to legally classify them yet, meaning they could be sold to anyone. On top of that, it was a gory old time, and movies like Driller Killer and I Spit on Your Grave became available to view in the home for the first time, with kids being able to buy or rent them from any video store without issue. And this is something true for my country as well. Now, in my country, after communism fell, the legislation was very murky, and for the first time ever, people were able to purchase video cassette recorders, something that were illegal under communism. Because people could actually start a private business with video cassette recorders, and the socialist Romanian system would classify that as a liberal profession, because it's basically a private business, which was illegal under socialism. The business consisted in a guy renting buying a VCR, and then allowing people to come in and watch the movie in exchange for a fee, similar to what you have on cinema, right? So you'd get people putting a lot of towels on the windows or drapes, you know, so that no one can see from outside inside, and they would just play the cassette recorder, usually late at night, so that they're not found by the police. But after the communist regime fell, people could purchase VCR, and there were a lot of places where you could go and rent and see a cassette. And I remember, like, I was, I don't know, 12... 11, and I watched Aliens, right? I purchased Aliens, a very gory movie, and I watched it, and like, no problem. A lot of kids did that back then. So I don't think this traumatizes kids, but again, the problem is that if you have ninja stars or something that a kid could easily replicate, they might try to replicate it and play with it, not with the intention to harm someone else, but accidents can happen, right? So this was the idea why they banned it in America. However, in the UK, they went a little bit overboard. In the UK, the fallout from this caused a lot of reactionary laws, and they managed to change a lot of legislation. And certain movies had to be banned or heavily censored. The TV censorship was also weird for about a decade, from the mid-80s to the mid-90s. And it got way relaxed in the late 90s. But it included things like nunchucks, throwing stars, which were popular in violent martial arts movies, as I said before, and under the reactionary belief that kids would be able to easily use or emulate such weaponry and injure themselves and others. I don't think it's just reactionary. Kids actually did manage to injure themselves and others, but the question is, like, shouldn't the parents be the ones that need to control this? Is it really required for the government to step in and ruin the fun for other people? And because of this, the word ninja in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were changed to hero to fit the whole thing, and scenes in the cartoons where Mikey used his nunchucks were heavily edited. So again, you know, because of children, other people who weren't children were affected by this as well, because, well, we need to think of the kids. And this is something that I disagree with. I think parents should parent their children and make sure that the children are well raised. And it shouldn't be for the television to educate children, and then the state having to mandate and legislate what is shown on television, because those kids only get their education from the idiot box. So anyway, hope I managed to explain to Skallagrim what's going on. I know it's a very old video of his, probably he found out after he posted it, but in case he didn't, I managed to explain it to him, and he can, I don't know if this is a comfort, that there are other nations worse off than the United States, where they went overboard and they actually censored the word ninja from a lot of cartoons and even movies. Also, by the way, this information is not from Reddit. Like, I knew about it from other sources, but I found this Reddit post, which is actually very easy for me to read while making this video. So I don't have to click on dozens of websites in order to pull up this information. So if you like this video, please subscribe. You know, looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say in the comments. Curious if you think it was a required measure. But again, the whole reason was if you see kids in the park throwing ninja stars at each other, you could just, you know, get them to stop. Because otherwise you wouldn't have legal grounds, you know, if you see kids playing with these things, which were extremely popular back in the day, like far more popular than most of you probably believe.